In the quiet town of Willowbrook, nestled in a valley surrounded by rolling hills, life was predictable, serene, and utterly ordinary. The kind of place where everyone waved to one another on the street, and secrets, no matter how small, rarely stayed hidden for long. It was the summer of 1993, and the annual high school prom was the highlight of the season. For many, it was a night of glamour and youthful dreams. For Lily Harper, it was the culmination of years of hard work, charm, and sheer magnetism. Lily Harper was the epitome of the American sweetheart. She had it all: beauty, brains, and a kind heart. Her warm smile lit up every room she entered, and her generosity was the stuff of legends. Whether tutoring struggling students after school or organizing charity drives, Lily's reputation was untarnished. The townsfolk adored her, and her classmates revered her. But adoration has a way of breeding jealousy, and in the shadow of Lily's golden glow stood Sarah Wilcox. Sarah wasn't unpopular by any means. She was ambitious, intelligent, and driven, but where Lily's light seemed effortless, Sarah's success often felt calculated. The two had been friends once, long before high school, but as the years passed, their paths diverged. Lily's natural charm made her the center of attention, while Sarah's achievements were often overlooked in comparison. By the time senior year rolled around, their rivalry was unspoken but palpable. Prom night arrived in a whirlwind of excitement and anticipation. The Willowbrook High Gymnasium had been transformed into a dazzling wonderland of twinkling lights and shimmering decorations. Parents snapped pictures of their children in tuxedos and gowns, capturing memories they believed would last a lifetime. Lily, dressed in a flowing blue gown that matched her eyes, looked every bit the princess. When her name was announced as prom queen, the cheers were deafening. She stepped onto the stage, her crown glittering under the lights, and gave a heartfelt speech that brought tears to more than a few eyes. Sarah stood in the crowd, her clenched fists hidden in the folds of her dress. To the outside world, she smiled politely, clapping along with everyone else. Inside, her mind raced with a storm of emotions: anger, frustration, and a desperate sense of inadequacy. That crown should have been hers. She had worked harder, sacrificed more, and yet, here she was, once again overshadowed by Lily Harper. The evening wound down, and couples began to filter out into the cool night air, some heading to after-parties and others stealing quiet moments under the stars. Lily, still buzzing from the excitement, decided to take a short walk to clear her head before meeting her friends. The streets of Willowbrook were safe, and she enjoyed the peaceful solitude as she strolled down the tree-lined avenue leading to her home. Unbeknownst to Lily, Sarah had been following her, a mix of resentment and impulsivity driving her actions. In Sarah's car, she trailed behind at a distance, her mind a tangle of conflicting thoughts. She didn't know what she wanted: to confront Lily, to yell at her, to demand an explanation for why she always came up short. But as Lily turned onto a darker, quieter street, something inside Sarah snapped. She pressed her foot to the gas pedal, her grip on the steering wheel tightening. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was as if her emotions had taken control, steering her actions. The sound of the impact shattered the stillness of the night. Lily's body crumpled to the ground, her crown tumbling off her head and skittering across the pavement. Sarah slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding in her chest. For a moment, she sat frozen, the gravity of what she had done sinking in. But then fear took over. Looking around to make sure no one had seen her, she drove away, leaving Lily lying motionless under the faint glow of a street lamp. It was hours before Lily was found by a passerby walking their dog. By then, the once vibrant prom queen was barely clinging to life. Paramedics rushed her to the hospital, where doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize her. The prognosis was grim: Lily had sustained severe head trauma and slipped into a coma. The news spread like wildfire through Willowbrook, sending shockwaves through the community. How could such a thing happen to someone like Lily Harper? Sarah's parents were the first to notice her unusual behavior. She was quieter than usual, jumpy at the slightest sound. When questioned about prom night, she stuck to a rehearsed story, claiming she had gone home early, too tired to attend any of the after-parties. But the guilt was a constant companion, gnawing at her insides. At school, the whispers began, speculation about who could have done such a thing. The police launched an investigation, but with no witnesses and no evidence, the case went cold. Lily's parents, devastated but determined, became fixtures at her bedside, holding on to hope even as the months turned into years. They organized fundraisers and started a scholarship in her name, keeping her memory alive in the hearts of the town. Meanwhile, Sarah threw herself into her studies, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of her secret. She graduated with honors, left Willowbrook for college, and built a successful career, all while carrying the burden of what she had done. For the town of Willowbrook, Lily Harper became a symbol of lost innocence. Her story was told and retold, each version tinged with sorrow and regret. As the years passed, the once vivid memories of that fateful prom night began to fade, replaced by new milestones and challenges. But for Sarah, the events of that night remained as sharp as ever, a haunting reminder of the choices she had made. The stage was set, the players in place. Little did anyone know, the story of Lily Harper was far from over. The days following Lily Harper's accident unfolded like a foggy nightmare for the town of Willowbrook. People whispered in hushed tones at grocery stores and church gatherings, their words filled with speculation, confusion, and disbelief. How could something so horrific happen to their shining star? The questions lingered in the air like a storm cloud, but answers were nowhere to be found. And so, a community that had once been close-knit began to fracture under the weight of suspicion and grief. At first, the police investigation was relentless. Officers interviewed nearly everyone who had attended prom, searching for anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual that night. They combed through evidence, looking for tire tracks or surveillance footage, but the residential street where Lily had been found offered no leads. Whoever was responsible had vanished into the night without leaving a trace. The town began to divide itself into two camps, those who believed it was a tragic accident and those who were convinced someone among them knew more than they were saying. Sarah Wilcox, meanwhile, was a master of composure. Outwardly, she appeared somber and empathetic, expressing her deepest condolences to Lily's family and joining her classmates in organizing vigils. But inside, she was a mess of frayed nerves. Every time the phone rang or someone knocked on the door, her stomach dropped, fearing the police had finally pieced together the truth. She replayed that night over and over in her head, the sound of the impact echoing like a drumbeat. Yet, as weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled, and Sarah began to believe she might actually get away with it. Lily's parents, John and Margaret Harper, refused to let her memory fade into the background. They became activists overnight, determined to find justice for their daughter. They held press conferences, plastered the town with flyers, and even appeared on a local news segment, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Their sorrow was palpable, and it was impossible not to feel their pain. Willowbrook, a town where nothing ever happened, was now the focus of statewide media attention. But even the heightened scrutiny failed to yield new clues, and as time dragged on, interest in the case waned. For Sarah, the public's short attention span was both a relief and a source of guilt. She watched as the town's focus shifted from Lily to more mundane matters, a new diner opening downtown, the high school football team's surprising winning streak, and the upcoming mayoral election. It was as though the world had simply moved on, leaving Lily's family to carry their grief alone. And yet, Sarah couldn't escape the shadow of what she had done. At night, when the town was still, she would sit in her car, staring at the street where it all happened, as if the asphalt might somehow offer her absolution. Then came the first anniversary of the accident. The town organized a candlelight vigil in Lily's honor, drawing hundreds of attendees. People shared stories about her kindness, her laugh, and her dreams for the future. Sarah stood at the back of the crowd, her face hidden by the flickering glow of her candle. Listening to those stories, she realized just how much Lily had meant to everyone, and how deeply she had wronged her. For a fleeting moment, she considered confessing, but fear held her back. What would her parents think? What would the town do to her? And so, she stayed silent, letting her guilt fester like an open wound. Meanwhile, the Harpers were relentless in their pursuit of justice. They hired a private investigator, a retired detective named Frank Danner, who had a reputation for solving cold cases. Frank was a grizzled man in his 60s with a no-nonsense attitude and a keen eye for detail. He began by re-examining the original police files, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. It wasn't long before he uncovered something curious, a single skid mark near the scene of the accident that didn't match the other vehicles recorded in the area. It wasn't much, but it was enough to reignite hope for Lily's parents. The new lead brought the case back into the public eye, and once again, the town of Willowbrook found itself in the grip of speculation. Who had been driving that car? Why hadn't they come forward? Frank's investigation led him to re-interview many of Lily's classmates, including Sarah. Sitting across from her at the small table in her parents' dining room, he asked her to recount the events of prom night. Sarah's hands shook as she held her glass of water, but she kept her story consistent. She'd gone home early, feeling unwell, and spent the rest of the night in her room. Frank watched her carefully, noting the slight hesitation in her voice and the way her eyes darted away when she spoke. But without concrete evidence, he couldn't press further. As Frank continued his investigation, he stumbled upon a former classmate of Lily's named Emma Carter. Emma had left Willowbrook shortly after graduating, but Frank tracked her down to a small town a few hours away. When they met, Emma seemed reluctant to talk at first, but eventually, she shared a memory that had haunted her for years. On the night of prom, she had seen a car speeding down the street where Lily was later found. Emma hadn't thought much of it at the time, but in retrospect, she remembered the car had been an older model, dark in color, with a distinctive scratch on the driver's side door. When Frank brought this information back to Willowbrook, it sent shockwaves through the community. People began scrutinizing their neighbors, looking for anyone who might own a car that matched Emma's description. Sarah, now an adult living on her own, felt the walls closing in. Her car at the time had matched that description perfectly, and though she had sold it years ago, she couldn't be sure the new owner hadn't kept it in town. The thought of her secret coming to light consumed her, making her more paranoid with each passing day. As the town turned its attention to the search for the mysterious car, Sarah faced an internal battle. On one hand, she wanted to confess, to unburden herself from the guilt that had weighed on her for so long. On the other hand, she feared the repercussions, not just for herself, but for her family. They had no idea what she had done, and she couldn't bear the thought of disappointing them. And so, she remained silent, even as the pressure mounted. The Harpers, meanwhile, clung to the hope that justice was within reach. Margaret Harper began attending church more frequently, praying for a resolution to the nightmare that had consumed their lives. John Harper, ever the pragmatist, threw himself into work, trying to distract himself from the pain. But behind closed doors, they both wrestled with the same question: would they ever know the truth? As the second anniversary of the accident approached, Frank Danner made a breakthrough. He tracked down the current owner of the car Emma had described, a man named Carl Evans who lived in a neighboring county. Carl had bought the car at an auction and had no connection to Willowbrook, but he still had the original registration paperwork, which listed the previous owner, Sarah Wilcox. The discovery sent a jolt through the investigation, but when Frank confronted Sarah with the evidence, she denied everything. The car had been sold years before the accident, she claimed, and she had no idea how it might have been involved. Frank didn't believe her, but without more evidence, his hands were tied. The Harpers were devastated by the setback, but they refused to give up. They turned to the community, asking anyone with information to come forward. The response was overwhelming, dozens of tips poured in, though most led to dead ends. Still, the renewed interest in the case brought a glimmer of hope to a family that had endured so much pain. As for Sarah, the weight of her secret became unbearable. She began withdrawing from her friends and family, isolating herself in her apartment. She avoided the places she once loved, fearing she might run into someone who suspected the truth. And yet, even in her solitude, she couldn't escape the memory of that night. It haunted her dreams, her thoughts, her every waking moment. The town of Willowbrook, once a beacon of harmony, was now a place of suspicion and unease. People eyed each other warily, wondering who among them might hold the key to solving the mystery. And through it all, Lily Harper remained in her coma, a silent witness to the storm that had consumed her town. But the story was far from over. Unbeknownst to everyone, a new chapter was about to unfold, one that would change Willowbrook forever. In the third year since Lily Harper's tragic accident, the once peaceful town of Willowbrook was still gripped by unanswered questions. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Lily's coma had left scars on the community, and while life continued in its predictable rhythm for most, for the Harper family, time had come to a standstill. Margaret and John Harper spent their days by Lily's bedside, holding her hand, speaking to her as if she could hear them, and hoping for even the slightest sign of recovery. But Lily remained still, her chest rising and falling with the aid of machines, her vibrant spirit seemingly locked away. Meanwhile, Sarah Wilcox's life had unraveled into a state of quiet desperation. Each day felt like a balancing act, teetering between maintaining her outward facade and keeping her dark secret buried. She had distanced herself from the community entirely, avoiding old friends and spending most of her time at work or in her small apartment. But no matter how hard she tried to move on, the weight of her guilt was suffocating. She'd developed a nervous habit of checking local news outlets daily, scanning for updates about Lily's condition or the ongoing investigation. Every new development, no matter how minor, sent a fresh wave of panic coursing through her. The town's obsession with Lily's case had dulled over time, but one persistent figure refused to let it fade into the background: Frank Danner. The retired detective turned private investigator was as relentless as ever, piecing together fragments of information and re-interviewing anyone who might provide new leads. Frank's instincts told him that the answer lay somewhere close, perhaps even within the tight-knit community itself. The Harper family's unwavering determination to find justice had only fueled his resolve, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone out there knew more than they were letting on. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, as breakthroughs often do. One evening, Frank received a call from Emma Carter, the classmate who had previously described seeing a suspicious car on the night of the accident. Emma's memory had been jogged by a chance encounter with an old yearbook, where she had come across a group photo that included both Lily and Sarah. Something about Sarah's expression in the picture struck her as odd, subdued, almost resentful, in contrast to the smiling faces around her. It prompted Emma to dig deeper into her own recollections of high school dynamics, and she soon remembered overhearing snippets of conversations about tension between Sarah and Lily. Frank was intrigued. While the lead was circumstantial, it gave him a new angle to explore. He began scrutinizing Sarah's past more closely, digging into her high school years and looking for any connection between her and Lily that might have gone unnoticed. What he found was a pattern of rivalry, academic competitions, student council elections, even the coveted title of prom queen. While Lily had always seemed blissfully unaware of Sarah's resentment, those who knew Sarah well described her as ambitious, competitive, and prone to holding grudges. Armed with this new information, Frank decided to pay Sarah another visit. She was visibly startled when he showed up at her apartment unannounced, her hands trembling as she opened the door. Frank didn't waste any time, diving straight into his questions about her relationship with Lily. Sarah denied any ill feelings, insisting that their interactions had been cordial, if not particularly close. But Frank's probing struck a nerve, and Sarah's carefully constructed mask began to crack. She grew defensive, her answers becoming curt and evasive. Frank noted her unease, filing it away as yet another piece of the puzzle. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, replaying the conversation in her mind. Frank's visit had rattled her more than she cared to admit, and she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully guarded secret was on the verge of being exposed. She knew she couldn't keep running forever, but the thought of confessing was terrifying. What would people think of her? What would happen to her life, her career, her family? And yet, the alternative, living with this crushing guilt indefinitely, seemed equally unbearable. While Sarah wrestled with her internal conflict, an unexpected event brought a glimmer of hope to the Harper family. Late one night, as Margaret sat by Lily's bedside reading aloud from a book, she noticed something she hadn't seen in years, a flicker of movement. Lily's fingers twitched ever so slightly, and her eyelids fluttered as if trying to open. Margaret's heart leaped in her chest, and she called for the nurses, who rushed in to assess the situation. The signs were subtle but undeniable. After years of unchanging stillness, Lily was beginning to show signs of life. The news spread quickly, reigniting the town's interest in the case and sparking a wave of cautious optimism. Doctors warned that the road to recovery would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, there was reason to hope. The Harpers were overjoyed, and they redoubled their efforts to create a supportive, stimulating environment for Lily. They played her favorite music, decorated her room with photos and mementos, and spoke to her constantly, encouraging her to fight her way back to consciousness. For Sarah, the news of Lily's potential awakening was both a relief and a nightmare. On one hand, it offered the possibility of closure for the Harpers and the town. On the other hand, it threatened to upend the fragile equilibrium she had maintained for so long. If Lily woke up, would she remember what had happened that night? Would she point the finger at Sarah, shattering the illusion of innocence Sarah had worked so hard to preserve? As the weeks passed, Lily's progress continued, albeit slowly. Her movements became more deliberate, and she began to respond to simple commands, squeezing her mother's hand or blinking in response to questions. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but they emphasized the importance of patience. Recovery from such a prolonged coma was a complex process, and it was impossible to predict how much of her former self Lily would regain. Meanwhile, Frank Danner's investigation reached a critical turning point. A forensic expert he had consulted was able to analyze the old skid mark from the accident scene and determined that it likely came from a car matching the make and model Sarah had owned at the time. The evidence wasn't definitive, but it was enough to raise serious questions. Frank confronted Sarah with this new information, but she stuck to her story, denying any involvement. However, the mounting pressure was taking its toll, and Sarah began to unravel in ways she couldn't hide. One night, after yet another sleepless evening tormented by memories of that fateful night, Sarah found herself driving aimlessly through the streets of Willowbrook. Her car eventually stopped in front of the Harper home, where she sat for hours, staring at the dimly lit windows and imagining the life that had been shattered by her actions. Tears streamed down her face as she considered what she had done and the pain she had caused. She knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out, one way or another. What Sarah didn't realize was that someone had noticed her car parked outside the Harper residence that night. A neighbor, curious about the unfamiliar vehicle, jotted down the license plate number and later mentioned it to Frank during a routine conversation. The details seemed minor at first, but combined with everything else Frank had uncovered, it painted a compelling picture. Sarah Wilcox was no longer just a person of interest, she was the prime suspect. The town of Willowbrook was on the cusp of uncovering the truth, and as events continued to unfold, the lives of everyone involved would be forever changed. Lily Harper's awakening, Sarah's crumbling facade, and Frank Danner's relentless pursuit of justice were all hurtling toward an inevitable collision, one that would reveal secrets long buried and force the town to confront the depths of its own humanity. In the early hours of a crisp autumn morning, the streets of Willowbrook were unusually quiet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Inside the Harper home, Lily's parents were sitting by her side, their spirits buoyed by the recent signs of her awakening. Margaret whispered softly to her daughter, recounting childhood memories and promising that a brighter future awaited her. John, stoic as ever, leaned forward in his chair, gently squeezing Lily's hand. The quiet hum of the machines in the room was the only sound, but even that felt less oppressive now. Every flutter of Lily's eyelids, every twitch of her fingers, brought hope that their daughter might finally return to them. Elsewhere in town, Sarah Wilcox was spiraling. She had spent the night pacing her apartment, consumed by a mix of fear and despair. The discovery of her car's connection to the accident was a blow she hadn't anticipated, and now she felt the walls closing in. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched, half expecting it to be Frank Danner or the police, ready to arrest her. Her thoughts raced as she tried to think of a way out, but there was none. The truth was catching up to her, and she knew it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. Sarah's mental state was further exacerbated by the whispers she couldn't escape. Willowbrook had always been a place where everyone knew everyone's business, and while her isolation had initially shielded her from the brunt of the town's scrutiny, that veil was now lifting. People were talking, speculating about her involvement in the accident, questioning her sudden withdrawal from the community, and recounting old stories of her rivalry with Lily. The pressure was unbearable, and Sarah found herself avoiding even the smallest errands for fear of running into someone who might confront her. Frank Danner, meanwhile, was piecing together the final threads of the mystery. The neighbor's tip about Sarah's car being spotted near the Harper residence was a significant breakthrough, and it gave him the leverage he needed to push the investigation forward. Frank visited the local precinct, presenting his findings to the police and urging them to reopen the case with Sarah as the primary suspect. The officers, initially skeptical, couldn't deny the mounting evidence. A warrant was issued to search Sarah's apartment and obtain her old phone records, which might reveal inconsistencies in her alibi. When the police arrived at Sarah's apartment that afternoon, she was unprepared. The knock on her door sent her heart racing, and when she saw the officers standing outside, she knew the time had come. They explained the warrant and stepped inside, combing through her belongings with meticulous precision. Sarah sat on the couch, her head in her hands, as they uncovered old keepsakes from high school, photos, yearbooks, and even a journal where she had once vented her frustrations about Lily. Each item felt like a nail in her coffin, and Sarah couldn't bring herself to look at the officers as they worked. The journal proved to be a damning piece of evidence. In it, Sarah had written extensively about her resentment toward Lily, detailing moments when she felt overshadowed or ignored. One particular entry, dated just days before prom, stood out. In it, Sarah had vented about the injustice of Lily's popularity, ending with the chilling words, "Sometimes I wish she'd just disappear." While not a confession, the entry painted a picture of a young woman consumed by jealousy, adding weight to the case against her. As the evidence mounted, Frank paid another visit to the Harper family. He explained the progress of the investigation and the likelihood that Sarah Wilcox had been involved in Lily's accident. Margaret and John listened in stunned silence, their emotions oscillating between relief that justice might finally be served and heartbreak over the betrayal by someone they had once trusted. Margaret, ever the optimist, clung to the hope that Sarah might confess and show remorse, but John's anger was palpable. He wanted answers, wanted to know why someone would rob them of their daughter's bright future. News of the investigation spread quickly through Willowbrook, and the town was once again engulfed in speculation. Some people were shocked by the allegations against Sarah, unable to reconcile the reserved woman they knew with the idea of someone capable of such a heinous act. Others weren't surprised, recalling Sarah's competitive nature and her long-standing rivalry with Lily. The divide deepened, with some defending Sarah as a victim of circumstantial evidence and others demanding swift justice. In the midst of the turmoil, a breakthrough occurred in the Harper household. Late one evening, as Margaret sat by Lily's bedside, she noticed her daughter's lips moving faintly, as if trying to speak. Margaret's breath caught, and she leaned closer, encouraging Lily to try again. Slowly, haltingly, Lily uttered her first words in years, "Where am I?" Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she called for the nurses, her voice trembling with a mix of joy and disbelief. The medical staff rushed in, conducting a flurry of tests to assess Lily's cognitive and physical state. The news of Lily's awakening spread like wildfire, bringing a wave of hope to the community. Reporters flocked to Willowbrook, eager for updates, and the Harpers found themselves at the center of a media frenzy. Despite the chaos, Margaret and John remained focused on helping their daughter recover. Lily's speech was limited, and her memories were fragmented, but she was awake, and that was a miracle in itself. The doctors explained that it might take time for her to fully process what had happened, and they urged the family to be patient. For Sarah, the news of Lily's awakening was a devastating blow. The one thing she had clung to, the hope that Lily's coma would shield her from the truth, was now gone. She spent sleepless nights imagining what Lily might remember, what she might say. The weight of her guilt, combined with the fear of exposure, became unbearable. She started avoiding her reflection in the mirror, unable to face the person she had become. As Lily's condition improved, so did her memories. Small fragments of that fateful night began to resurface, snapshots of the prom, the sound of laughter, the sight of Sarah standing by the punch bowl with an expression she couldn't quite place. Each memory was like a piece of a jigsaw puzzle, and while the picture was still incomplete, Lily felt a growing sense of unease. One evening, as she sat with her parents, she hesitantly asked, "What happened to me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications, and Margaret gently explained the accident in the vaguest terms, not wanting to overwhelm her daughter. But Lily wasn't satisfied with half-truths. She pressed for details, determined to understand how her life had been derailed so completely. As her memories continued to resurface, she began to piece together the moments leading up to the accident. A confrontation in the school hallway, Sarah's heated words, and the flash of headlights before everything went black. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, and she turned to her parents with wide eyes. "It was Sarah," she whispered. The revelation sent shockwaves through the Harper household. Margaret and John immediately informed Frank, who saw it as the missing piece of the puzzle. With Lily's testimony, the case against Sarah was all but sealed. The police moved quickly, arresting Sarah at her apartment and charging her with reckless endangerment and leaving the scene of an accident. As she was led away in handcuffs, Sarah finally broke down, confessing everything to the officers in a torrent of tears. The town of Willowbrook was left to grapple with the fallout. For the Harpers, Lily's awakening was a second chance, a miracle that gave them hope for the future. But for Sarah, it was the end of the road, a reckoning for years of guilt and deceit. The community, once divided, began to heal as the truth brought a sense of closure. And as Lily began the long journey of rebuilding her life, she carried with her the resilience of someone who had faced unimaginable challenges and come out stronger on the other side. The courtroom was silent as Sarah Wilcox sat at the defendant's table, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on the polished wooden surface in front of her. The weight of the past years had finally culminated in this moment, a reckoning that could no longer be delayed. The prosecutor stood, delivering a scathing opening statement that laid out the events leading to the tragic accident that had left Lily Harper in a coma for decades. The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, each syllable driving home the gravity of Sarah's actions. Meanwhile, Lily and her parents sat in the gallery, their expressions a mixture of pain, resolve, and cautious hope. Lily's recovery had been nothing short of miraculous, but it was far from complete. She still struggled with gaps in her memory and bouts of fatigue, yet her determination to reclaim her life was unwavering. Sitting in the courtroom was an emotional ordeal for her, but she refused to shy away from the truth. This trial, in her eyes, was not just about justice, it was about closure. It was about confronting the person who had so profoundly altered the course of her life and finding a way to move forward. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution presented a compelling case against Sarah. Witnesses were called to the stand, each adding another layer to the story. Emma Carter recounted her sighting of Sarah's car near the scene of the accident, her voice steady but tinged with regret that she hadn't spoken up sooner. The forensic expert explained the analysis of the skid marks and the journal entries that hinted at Sarah's jealousy. But it was Lily's testimony that proved to be the most powerful. When she took the stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. Lily spoke with a quiet strength, describing the fragments of memories that had resurfaced since her awakening. She detailed the confrontation with Sarah on prom night, the harsh words, the simmering anger in Sarah's eyes. While she admitted that she didn't recall the exact moment of the accident, the circumstantial evidence painted a damning picture. Her words were laced with both heartbreak and a longing for understanding, and it was clear that while she sought accountability, she also yearned for some semblance of reconciliation. When it was Sarah's turn to testify, she struggled to maintain her composure. She admitted to following Lily on the night of the prom, her mind clouded by jealousy and anger. She described how she had lost control, not just of the car, but of herself. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to fleeing the scene, driven by fear and the misguided hope that the truth would never surface. Her voice cracked as she addressed the Harper family directly, apologizing for the pain she had caused. "I can never undo what I've done," she said, her words choked with emotion. "But I am truly sorry." The courtroom was gripped by an uneasy silence as her words hung in the air. For Margaret Harper, the apology stirred conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe in Sarah's remorse, to find some semblance of forgiveness. But John's anger remained raw, a protective instinct for the daughter who had lost so much. And Lily, caught between her desire for justice and her innate compassion, found herself grappling with the complexities of human fallibility. As the trial neared its conclusion, the defense attorney made a heartfelt plea for leniency, arguing that Sarah's actions, while inexcusable, had been driven by youthful insecurity and emotional turmoil. The prosecutor, however, emphasized the devastating consequences of Sarah's choices, calling for a sentence that would reflect the severity of the crime. The jury deliberated for hours, their verdict awaited with bated breath. In the end, Sarah was found guilty of reckless endangerment and fleeing the scene of an accident. The judge handed down a sentence that balanced justice with an opportunity for redemption, 5 years in prison, followed by community service and mandatory counseling. For the Harper family, the verdict brought a mix of relief and lingering sadness. Justice had been served, but the scars of the past could never be fully erased. In the months that followed, life in Willowbrook slowly began to stabilize. Lily focused on her rehabilitation, determined to reclaim the life she had lost. She returned to school, taking online courses to catch up on the education she had missed, and began volunteering at a local community center, finding purpose in helping others. Her resilience and optimism inspired everyone around her, and she quickly became a symbol of hope for the town. Meanwhile, Sarah's time in prison was marked by deep introspection. She enrolled in therapy sessions, confronting the insecurities and anger that had driven her actions. She also began writing letters to the Harper family, not expecting forgiveness but hoping to convey her remorse. Margaret, ever the peacemaker, responded to one of the letters, initiating a cautious correspondence that eventually grew into a fragile understanding. Lily's days were structured around her recovery. Physical therapy sessions pushed her to rebuild strength and mobility, while cognitive exercises helped her sharpen her memory and process the flood of new information. Her therapists marveled at her progress, often remarking on her determination and resilience. But for Lily, each milestone was a reminder of the person she used to be, the prom queen with dreams of college, travel, and a future filled with endless possibilities. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes in her room, Lily stumbled upon a collection of her journals from high school. Flipping through the pages, she was struck by the voice of her younger self, hopeful, ambitious, and utterly unaware of the storm that lay ahead. She lingered on one entry written just days before the prom, where she had detailed her plans for the future. "I want to make a difference," she had written. "I want to leave a mark on this world." The words resonated deeply, rekindling a sense of purpose that had been dormant for far too long. Inspired, Lily decided to channel her experiences into something meaningful. She began speaking at local schools, sharing her story with students who hung on her every word. She spoke candidly about her rivalry with Sarah Wilcox, the dangers of unchecked jealousy, and the importance of kindness and forgiveness. Her talks became a sensation, drawing crowds that included not just students but parents and educators as well. Lily's message transcended her personal tragedy, it became a call to action for a community that had seen its share of divisions. As Lily's influence grew, she was invited to participate in broader initiatives. She partnered with organizations that focused on conflict resolution, mental health, and restorative justice, using her platform to advocate for change. Her most ambitious project was the establishment of the Harper Center for Healing and Reconciliation, a community space dedicated to helping individuals and families navigate challenges, resolve conflicts, and find pathways to forgiveness. The center quickly became a cornerstone of Willowbrook, attracting people from all walks of life. Meanwhile, Sarah Wilcox was facing her own transformation. Prison was a harsh and isolating environment, but it also provided her with the time and space to confront the choices that had led her there. Therapy sessions forced her to examine the roots of her envy and insecurity, and slowly, she began to understand the ways in which her actions had been shaped by her fears of inadequacy. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself to grieve, not just for what she had done to Lily but for the life she had squandered in the process. Sarah's letters to Lily became a lifeline, a way to express the remorse that words could barely contain. Though she never expected a response, the act of writing became a form of catharsis. To her surprise, Lily did reply, tentatively at first, then with increasing openness. Their correspondence was raw and unfiltered, a dialogue that explored pain, anger, and the possibility of redemption. Over time, their letters evolved from confrontations to conversations, each woman finding in the other a mirror of their shared humanity. When Sarah was released on parole, she returned to Willowbrook, unsure of what awaited her. The town's reception was mixed, while some saw her as a pariah, others recognized her efforts to make amends. Sarah threw herself into community service, volunteering at the Harper Center and working closely with Lily on initiatives aimed at preventing the kind of animosity that had once consumed her. Their unlikely partnership became a symbol of healing, proof that even the deepest wounds could be tended to with patience and compassion. As the years passed, Willowbrook continued to evolve. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer the defining feature of the town. The Harper Center flourished, expanding its reach and inspiring similar initiatives in neighboring communities. Lily became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the country to share her story and advocate for restorative justice. Despite her busy schedule, she always returned to Willowbrook, the place that had shaped her and held her heart. One evening, as Lily prepared for a gala celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Harper Center, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of her parents, whose unwavering love had been her anchor, of Frank Danner, whose determination had uncovered the truth, of Sarah, whose transformation was a testament to the power of accountability and growth. Most of all, she thought of her younger self, the girl who had dreamed of making a difference and who, against all odds, had found a way to do just that. Standing on the stage that night, Lily looked out at the sea of faces before her, friends, family, colleagues, and strangers whose lives had intersected with hers in ways both profound and fleeting. She took a deep breath, the weight of the past lifting as she spoke. "Life doesn't always go the way we plan," she began, her voice steady and clear. "But even in the face of unimaginable loss, we have the power to choose how we move forward. We can let pain define us, or we can use it to build something beautiful." The audience erupted into applause, but Lily barely heard it. Her gaze had fallen on a familiar face in the crowd, Sarah Wilcox, standing near the back, her expression one of quiet pride. In that moment, Lily felt a profound sense of peace. The road to this place had been long and arduous, but it had led her to a life rich with meaning and connection. And as she stepped off the stage, the applause still echoing in her ears, Lily Harper knew that the best chapters of her story were yet to come.